Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Scramble Formation, a classic Taito arcade shoot 'em up. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From legendary developer Taito, Scramble Formation, or Tokio as it was known in North America, released to arcades in 1986. This is one I have mixed feelings on, as it doesn't really feel as technically advanced as I feel most other Taito shoot 'em ups of the era were. This kind of feels has this B-team, more basic feel to it, and in addition to that, there are just some design choices which are relatively off-putting throughout the course of the gameplay. So I could go and recommend this for Taito fans or those that are looking for a more difficult arcade shoot 'em up to score attack, but that's really who I feel this particular release is for. With all that said, let's dive in and have a look. So for our purposes today, we're going to be looking at the English version, Tokio, and the biggest reason really just comes right at the beginning. So as you start the game, you can see here that we have this little map that is our path around Tokio. We start from the Capitol building and work our way around fighting these enemy forces. That map is of course in Japanese on the original version, so the English is a little bit nice there. This is a relatively straightforward vertical scrolling shoot 'em up. We have one button that is for our primary attack. In our base formation, that attack will hit both enemies in the air as well as enemies on the ground. But the real meat of this game is as we collect these drones from the enemies, we can use those to build other formations. So there's one that's an anti-air formation, there's one that's an anti-ground formation, and using those mechanics we can ultimately, that's your strategy for the game itself. You want to go and find the best formation for the situation you find yourself in. But the trick is you have to be quick enough to switch between them as the situations arise. So for most of the time, I think it's best to go and stay in your formation 1, the one that covers both air and ground, as a lot of times we'll be dealing with enemies both in the air as well as in the ground. This does have a checkpoint system, so when you die, you will be started at a checkpoint. However, the checkpoints are pretty generous, and so it's not that big of a deal breaker. However, there are no continues in this game. Once you've run out of lives, that is it for your run. The drones themselves, you can collect up to 4 drones total, and once you have 4 drones, anything past that point, you'll be banking for additional drones in the future. Either if your drones are hit by enemy shots or enemies, that will destroy your drones. Then one of your backups will immediately replace it, or we have one last attack that we can use. And that's if you're pressing the change formation button at the same time you're firing, we'll fire forth our drones in this relatively powerful like super missile, or a kamikaze attack is maybe a little bit more accurate. They'll deal quite a bit of damage, and there'll be this like spiral of area of effect that will last a little while, dealing additional damage and making it significantly easier to take out the enemies. The downside is you are using up your drones, and the drones themselves, sometimes they're really easy to come by, other times they're kind of difficult. It just depends on where you're at in the stage and the RNG. So here's our first boss, relatively easy to take care of if you're careful. You have to use your ground attack, so your missile if you're just in your default configuration, or changing the drones to the ground attack formation if you have enough to use to take that one out. However, if you don't take it out fast enough, it will ultimately just leave the screen. That's the only boss I've encountered in the game so far, so I don't know if there are any more or if it's just that default giant plane. In its future iterations, it does get a little bit tricky with some sneak attacks. It'll pop out of the clouds and fire missiles right away, which I do feel is a little bit unfair. And here's another part that I do feel is a bit unfair. So when you start the stage here, you've got all these balls flying in from outside of the stage. Even if you know those are coming, our plane is definitely slow, and it's hard to dodge out of the way of those particular enemies. So that's one of my frustrations, is it feels like there are all these sneak attacks that are built into the game itself that ultimately ruin some of the enjoyment. It's like the game is difficult enough without them having to go and resort to those sort of tricks, so just the fact that they did is a little frustrating. And those are our base mechanics for Scramble Formation, or Tokio, as you would might otherwise know it. So overall, this is not a game that I've really enjoyed my time with, as I feel like the various design choices that they've made with some of the sneak attacks and not having any continues, that sort of thing, ultimately ends up creating a frustrating experience. It's difficult to go and see a lot of progress. The game is definitely trying to go and take you out, and even if you know some of those attacks are coming, they can go and be rather hard to avoid. But as far as other minus flavors for this one, the lack of continues are really my biggest one. The large hitbox coupled with the sneak attacks and just the general way the enemies attack makes it kind of a difficult game to play. It's best to go and play defensively, so once you've started learning the enemy attack patterns, if you can't get close to an enemy and destroy them quickly, it's probably best to just avoid that enemy and any shots that they might happen to fire. For ground enemies, they'll fire missiles either to the left or right, so you'll want to watch for that, and if you can't get to them in time, just avoid them and dodge the shots that do fire your direction, as those missiles might pop up in a way that would be fast and hard to dodge if you're otherwise unprepared for it. The sound design is also relatively atrocious. There's really just the one music track through the game itself, and overall the sound effects, especially when you're not shooting, the plane's propeller sound is a little on the grating side, so I don't necessarily enjoy that element of it either. But on the plus flavors, I do think the whole mechanic of having these fighters that you're supposed to, or these drones rather, that you're supposed to put into formation around you is really interesting, though most of the time it feels like they're just being used as shields against enemy shots, especially from behind you. And then the game does have a nice, classic, challenging arcade score attack feel to it. So really, that's what I'm saying, is if that's the kind of experience you're looking for, then this one might be a title to check out. But for most people, I think this is an arcade archive that's probably a fair pass. So the second time that carrier pops up, it starts with a missile sneak attack, and if you're not ready for them, or even if you are, they'll be hard to dodge, and most likely you might lose a life or two before we can really begin our assault on this guy. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining me this week. I hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and we'll see you again next time.